Finally, up to Marshall. Marshall's original shop in London was just 11 feet wide and 22 feet deep. But they probably used meters, so. Anyway, Jim Marshall was a dance band drummer and drum teacher who actually mentored Mitch Mitchell. He saved his money and opened up a shop at 76 Uxbridge Road, West London. He started selling just drums, then expensive imported band's equipment that his customers requested, such as the American Gibson ES335 guitar, as well as everything Fender. However, Fender amps just weren't coming in fast enough, and they were expensive. This left a huge hole in the development of the UK's rock scene, and it was a hole that even the famous Vox AC30 struggled to fill. They just weren't loud enough like Fenders were, thanks to Dick Dale. Customers such as Pete Townsend concurred that an amp with Fender guts with a smaller price tag would indeed sell. Jim Marshall, along with Ken Brand, Ken Underwood, and Dudley Craven, began working on prototypes. Within 5 prototypes, they reverse-engineered a Fender Bassman, and Dudley Craven was responsible for the changes from the Fender to what is now known as the Marshall JTM 45. According to Ken Underwood, the first amp was tested one Sunday night at a nearby music venue, the Ealing Club, by a local group of musicians who always gave useful feedback. In that group was future Jimi Hendrix Experience drummer Mitch Mitchell, who was employed as a Saturday boy in the shop. The first amp Marshall released was the Marshall JTM 45 in 1963, and it was a near copy of the Fender Bassman. Praised as the most desirable of all Marshall's amps, and many consider this to be the best sounding amp of all time, still to this day, they used higher output tubes than Fender. It was said at the time that Marshall created the world's first great bad amplifier, quote unquote. With that paradigm shift, the stage was set for an entirely new type of music to take root. They also introduced a closed-back speaker cabinet and an enhanced negative feedback circuit, which affects the harmonics. It was first demonstrated in the shop in autumn of 1962, where it caused a sensation, plus a flood, according to Jim, of 20 or more orders on the spot. Pete Townsend was one of those 20. The amp was also available for bass, which lacked a brightness capacitor, as well as a PA version, which lacked a mixer capacitor. Used as the basis for all Marshall's subsequent amps, and the Marshall sound in general, the JTM 45 is still compared to a tweed Fender amp. It has more sag and less crunch than later Marshalls that you're familiar with. The JTM 45 delivers a smooth Marshall crunch, with a warm bass response due to the EL34 tubes, used by Eric Clapton, Pete Townsend, Dan Auerbach, Angus Young, John Mayer, the list goes on. To reduce costs, Marshall started sourcing parts from the UK. This meant a switch from the 6L6 tubes to the KT66 tubes that gave Marshall a more aggressive voice, which Eric Clapton really enjoyed. A false rumor was spread that Eric Clapton requested Jim Marshall to make a combo amp with tremolo that would fit in the boot of his car. The real story is actually that Clapton was touring with a side gig after leaving the Yardbirds when the tour tanked. He left for London abruptly, leaving his JTM 45 half-stack behind. It was November 1965 when Clapton came back ampless and poor to start his second stint with the Bluesbreakers. That's when he purchased the iconic 2x12 combo on credit from Jim's shop. The combos had been in production for nearly a year at that point, and even went through one design change already. This makes sense, since Marshall was in thick competition against the Vox AC30 for small amps. This JTM KT66 combo amp, now commonly referred to as the Bluesbreaker, because Clapton used it on John Mayall's album Bluesbreakers with Eric Clapton. This is probably the most coveted Marshall of all time. You want one? Well, I hope you're willing to spend $15,500. So, yeah, let me know. Now, this is very important. The JTM 45 had taken inspiration from a great Fender tweed amp at the very moment that Fender was moving away from that sound. For Fender, the period 1962 to 1964 was the blonde and brown-faced era, a time of much experimentation where drastic circuit alterations would soon lead to a bright but relatively calm and controlled blackface family of amps in the mid-60s. Therefore, Marshalls sound like early Fenders that were outfitted with supercharged Hemi engines. But guess what? Guitarists still needed more.